we are confronted by, we are now being ruled by a fascist regime, relentlessly assaulting civil rights and liberties and openly promoting bigotry and inequality. This has caused disgust, anger, and agonizing among huge numbers of people. And there have been many important acts of resistance, big and small, to the continuing outrages committed by this regime and its supporters. But the regime remains in power and is determined to ride roughshod over all obstacles to carry out its monstrous agenda. And the need for a massive outpouring of people acting together non-violently but with sustained determination to create a political situation where this regime cannot remain in power cries out. The organization Refuse Fascism, refusefascism.org, has put forward a call and a plan and is actively building for that mass mobilization. So this poses sharply the immediate urgent challenge we face. Calling this regime fascist is not an insult, but speaks to the terrible reality. There is a direct line from the Confederacy to the fascists of today, and a direct connection between their white supremacy, their open disgust and hatred for LGBT people as well as women, their willful rejection of science and the scientific method, their raw America First jingoism and trumpeting of the superiority of Western civilization, and their bellicose wielding of military power, including their expressed willingness and blatant threats to use nuclear weapons to destroy countries with the finger of a demented bully on the nuclear button. A regime that, without exaggeration, threatens not just greatly heightened suffering for the masses of humanity, but the very existence of humanity itself. It used to be a common saying, to the person of the right, order is more important than justice, while for the person of the left, it is the opposite. Now the question is put squarely to liberals, and really to everyone. Which, after all, is more important? Order, even if that is the order of fascism, with everything that means? Or justice, even if that means stepping outside of our comfort zone and putting ourselves on the line to prevent this fascism from consolidating its rule and fully implementing its program? Whether we consider ourselves revolutionaries, convinced of the need for a radical overturning of the system and thorough transformation of society, or we believe that it is possible to bring about changes that will lead to a more just society within this system. Whether our understanding is that America is not and cannot be a force for good in the world, or we hope it still can become that, all of us need to come together and act together with the urgency that corresponds to the terrible present and the gravely imperiled future that this fascist regime represents for humanity, and with the conviction that something far better is necessary and possible. Thousands must be organized to take to the streets in cities all over the country, beginning on November 4, overcoming fear and feeling the strength of their common cause and action and their common aspiration and determination, making clear their resolve to not just make a statement, but to continue, and more than that, to spread and multiply their numbers and impact until millions have been mobilized and refuse to stop until the demand has been met. This nightmare must end. The Trump-Pence regime must go.
That was Bob Avakian, and we'll talk about him and our guest, Carl Dix, with our guest, Carl Dix, in just a minute. But welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos, and I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College here in New York. The left, at times, has done a masterfully self-destructive job by allowing various parochial factions and schisms to dominate their message and vision. These arguments have often insisted that all those on the left should follow their particular version of a leftist truth as they engage in one-upsmanship as to whose message is the purest version of that truth. Strains and authoritarian left have managed to accomplish a turning off of large segments of the general population to the cause and have demonstrated a cannibalistic capacity to divide and conquer burgeoning movements that could have made large progressive differences for vast segments of humanity. From French radical republicanism and utopian socialism to Marx and Engels' influential Communist Manifesto, from the First International to the split between supporters of Marx and the anarchists under Bakunin, forming the International Workers' Association, from the divisions in the Second International over the issue of World War I and opposition to the war by Lenin and Rosa Luxemburg, to more recent divisions in the United States between the old communist left and the new left. The left, unfortunately, has often been its own worst enemy. On the show today, as progressive activists and the radical imagination seek to establish a more inclusive vision for the betterment of humanity, we're excited to have on a dear friend and comrade who I have the deepest respect for, even as we struggle in dialogue over our disagreements. Carl Dix is a co-initiator of Refuse Fascism, a longtime revolutionary leader and a representative of the Revolutionary Communist Party, USA. He grew up in a Baltimore ghetto and was one of 6 GIs in 1970 who refused orders to go to Vietnam and spent 2 years in prison for his stand. I was proud to be a part of his and Cornel West's organizing efforts in 2011 to protest and demonstrate against the New York City Police Department's infamous stop and frisk policy. The subsequent trial and media attention helped dramatically change the narrative in the city and around the country, influenced major candidates' positions on this all-important issue in the 2012 New York City mayoral campaign. Carl has recently been throwing his all into mobilizing people across the country in the streets and campuses to take up the call of stopping fascism and putting an end to the Trump-Pence regime. He's an ardent advocate of the work and ideas of Bob Avakian, who we've just heard from. BA, as he's commonly called by his followers, is chairman of the Revolutionary Communist Party, USA, a Marxist-Leninist Maoist organization founded in 1975. He's developed a theoretical framework for what he considers to be a new stage of communist revolution, calling it a new synthesis of communism. I've invited Carl on to dialogue about this major work and its potential to bring the left, progressives, and people of goodwill together for revolutionary change. So welcome, Carl, to the Radical Imagination, especially on April 4th here, 50th anniversary of commemorating Martin Luther King's assassination. So I think it's even more poignant to have you here and talk about this very interesting work and what you've been doing in terms of organizing and so on. So it's great to have you here.
It's great to be on the show again, Jim.
Terrific, terrific. Well, tell me about what you've been doing. What is this new work about, the demonstrations? What are you doing in terms of crisscrossing the country and organizing?
Well, look, what we're trying to do is to bring to people the understanding that Trump is much more than a buffoon, a clownish figure, gross, all of that
Idiot.
stuff.
Right, exactly.
And he is all of that.
True.
But even more than that, he has become the representative for a thrust of hammering fascist rule into place in this country. And that will not only mean intensifying all of the horrors that were already coming down on black people, the police.
He may or may not be aware of that. What's your...
Okay, I think he's aware of what he's doing.
Okay, all right, we'll get
and we can talk about that some more.
Go ahead, okay.
But it will not only be intensifying horrors like what you and I and Cornell and others took to the streets for around stop and frisk and police terror in general not only intensifying the horrors that were already coming down on our
Right.
immigrant sisters and brothers, because Barack Obama was dubbed by many immigrant rights forces as the deporter in chief. Definitely rolling back recent gains by lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer peoples, and escalating the threat of war and the threat to the devastation of the environment. But not only intensifying all of that, but also ripping away the rights that people have to stand up and resist that. And that would be a critical dimension. And we can talk about how all of this comes together. Like I said, I think he's aware of it, because some of the stuff like the "I alone can fix these problems," first off, misstating, overstating, and sometimes creating out of nowhere the problems that he alone can fix. But this whole thing of "I alone can fix it" then becomes, if he's challenged, like on a basic point of not as many people came to his inauguration as came to Barack Obama's inauguration, then it becomes, no, I had more people, because I alone am the determiner of what's true. And you've seen that again and again, from how many people were at his inauguration to he didn't really lose the popular vote because millions of people that no one else knew about, according to Trump, voted illegally, and that's why the numbers seem to indicate that he lost the popular vote. And then he keeps going with all of that, and when he's challenged, media that challenges him becomes fake news. And we're talking here, he's not talking about revolutionary media like Revcom.us and Revolution newspaper. He's talking about CNN, ABC, NBC, all the rest. And he's basically saying other sections of even the capitalist imperialist ruling class are illegitimate, and only the section that's behind me, the Christian fascists, the climate deniers, and all these, we are the only legitimate force. Yes, we're the only legitimate force in society. But it's not the people at the bottom who voted for Trump. That's not who he's talking about. The Christian fascist forces that Mike Pence brought into the thing. The forces like the billionaire business owners, some of whom came into the cabinet.
Right, Mnuchin and Pruitt and the group.
Some of whom have gone out.
Not yet.
Tillerson went out. He was one of them.
Right. You can't write this. I know we've had Jim Gilligan and Bandy Lee, who wrote this book, The Dangerous Case of, were part of the 27 psychiatrists, mental health experts, who wrote the book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. Okay, so you're not writing this off as some sort of delusional narcissist. This goes beyond the particular individual, and is part of a structure that he represents, that he is put in, that is supported by behind the scenes, or is he a rogue element that, in a Machiavellian sense, can manipulate people in a fascistic way, dividing and conquering them but again, mainly for his own ego, his own betterment, or is this some larger, more sinister structure?
It is larger than Trump, and Trump is the representative for it.
Okay.
And see, this is why people need to really watch this film, because one of the things Avakian does very early in the film is he poses the question, how did we get into this situation with this fascist in the White House?
And just tell us for a minute, give us a little background about Bob Avakian, and to set the stage a little more for his writing and his thinking over the years, and why this is so important, why you feel this is so important right now.
Okay, well, let me say a little bit about this particular point in the film, because it's right here.
Too much to say, right?
And then I'll get back into, well, who is this guy saying it?
Okay.
But he talks about, well, what is it about the history of this country that brings us to this point? And it didn't just spring up with Trump. When you talk about the white supremacy that is now a calling card of the administration that's running this country, you know, we saw that when Donald Trump couldn't bring himself to condemn the white supremacists who were gathering under Confederate flags and Nazi banners and assaulting people, killing one of the counter-protesters. this is all a part of America, and it has been bubbling up, in particular in the Republican Party, for 5 decades. You go back to Richard Nixon's Southern Strategy. You go through Ronald Reagan declaring his
But
presidency.
Bob goes back to the Confederacy.
I know, it goes all the way back,
Yeah,
but
and
within
further.
the modern Republican Party,
Exactly.
it's 50 years.
Okay.
And Reagan declaring his candidacy for president at the site
Philadelphia,
of
Mississippi.
Philadelphia, Mississippi, the site of an atrocity committed by Ku Klux Klanners against civil rights workers. Avakian gets into all of that, and he
Or
traces.
visiting Pittsburgh.
Yes, he
National
traces it
Cemetery.
up to the current day and shows that what we have is a capitalist imperialist system that, because of its own contradictions, needs to bring forward a severe repressive program in order to keep the empire, the global empire, together.
survive.
And Trump has become the vessel for that. And it does fit into, and it brings with it some of his particular and peculiar facets. Like, there is a certain, the guy's into himself. That's pretty clear. But we're not talking about a lunatic fringe here, but an actual movement that's developed. And Avakian traces it in this film and shows how we got here. And then he challenges people to see it for what it is and act in relation to it, because he speaks to, because people say, oh, well, it was the white working class. Well, actually, the whites who voted for Trump were from all economic stratas and backgrounds, and he did actually a little better among somewhat better off white people than the white people on the bottom in the working class. But it was not economic issues that cemented people to Trump, because if that was the case, how come black and brown working class people overwhelmingly rejected Trump?
Right.
And that was because the white supremacy that was being pushed out there made real clear to black people and most Latinos and other oppressed people and people of color, hey, this guy is not for us. Far too many white people were willing to overlook that because, hey, he's talking about bringing back coal jobs and manufacturing plants.
And appealing to white feelings of inadequate, not insecurity,
of having been victimized.
Yeah, white nationalism.
And see,
appealing to the same thing, white supremacy,
yes.
white nationalism.
And see, a lot of white people have been victimized, but not as white people. A lot of white working class people have been victimized as workers who've been exploited and then tossed aside.
But have been told that it's blacks
if
who are
you
doing
begin
it,
to look at it
immigrants.
like I've been victimized as a white person, then you're wrapping yourself around foul stuff in the history of America, because we are talking about a country, and again, Avakian brings this out in the film, we're talking about a country that was founded on genocide against the native inhabitants and dragging millions of people from Africa in the chains of slavery. And people have to recognize that and get that those are twin evils in the foundation of this country that have never been purged, have never been addressed. Even when there were advances on it, like the formal ending of slavery through the Civil War, it gets followed by an overturning
in the 13th Amendment,
an overturning of the Reconstruction era, where there was the opening and the possibility for black people to get equal rights, and slavery by another name, convict leasing, people becoming sharecroppers on the same plantations where they had been enslaved previously, still being exploited and subjugated. And today, it's like you were saying, the 13th Amendment, which supposedly was a part of ending slavery, has opened the door to millions of people being imprisoned, because it talks about slavery is no longer legal except as conditions, as a condition of imprisonment. And then you have mass incarceration, which disproportionately targets black and brown people. So this is what we're dealing with, and we have to bring this to people and not just talk about it with them, but challenge them to act.
And before you get to now, so Bob is showing this historically. He also uses science, right? He is scientifically using a scientific method to establish these connections and understanding. How is that brought into his work?
Well, it just goes all the way through it, because when you're talking about Bob Avakian, you're not only talking about a guy who's thrown his whole life into the struggle to uproot injustice in this country, and through the course of dealing with that became a revolutionary and a communist and a leader in that, but someone who has always gone at, like, we got to question this. Is this right? Are we going at this right?
The
Are we
contradictions.
understanding it right? What's
The
the reality?
dialectical.
Yes.
Okay, that.
What's the reality, and what are the pathways to transform that reality? And you saw it. You know, I've been a follower of his since back in the 1970s, and you know, Mao Zedong dies. The revolutionaries in China, who were his close cohorts, get arrested, and the question comes up of, does this mean revolution isn't possible? And
Or is there a revisionism or
well,
counter movements?
China had taken the revolution.
China's not a communist country.
Not anymore.
It's a
But in the
capitalist
in the middle 1970s, when Mao died and his comrades were arrested, it was the pinnacle of the revolution. It's the farthest the revolution had gone, and that was a real body blow to the revolution. And some people gave up the revolution. Well, if China can't do it, what's the sense of us trying? Others tried to religiously cling to it. Avakian, by contrast, was like, okay, let's look at this.
Why it
Let's
failed.
scientifically try to
Okay.
figure out
And
what
where-
happened. Why did it fail? Were
Where
there
should it go?
shortcomings
What-
in it?
right.
Was it even? Was
How's
it wrong?
Right, okay.
And through the course of that, he identified and determined there were some shortcomings, and we got to break through on these shortcomings. And that's something that he's been doing all of his life, and that's what led to him forging the new synthesis of communism that you talked about in the intro. And this film, The Trump-Pence Regime Must Go, is a case of him applying that synthesis to this major development of a fascist regime taking
Bringing
power.
it up to date in
Yeah,
a sense.
yes.
What the contemporary struggle in America.
And see, that's the point, because Marx, the film, The Young Marx, kind of,
yeah.
it's a good film. People should see that too, but don't don't sleep on Bob Avakian to see The Young Marx. See them both. But one thing that Marx said is that the philosophers of the world, they have analyzed everything about it. The point is to change it.
Okay.
And that's Avakian, always digging into the reality. What's new and developing? Is there something we didn't see previously? Okay, this is here. How does that factor into and change the situation? But always from the perspective of, how are we going to eradicate?
Praxis.
How are we
What
going
is
to
to be done?
eradicate this injustice? And that's what he's doing here with this film, and what we're doing with Refuse Fascism. And again, like he did in the trailer, inviting everybody into it. We're not saying, if you're a revolutionary, get with us and fight fascism. We do want revolutionaries to get with the revolution. But look, if you're not for the revolution, if you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Buddhist, but you see this fascist regime for what it is, then we have to come together and work to drive it out. And that's
Even
what
with our differences, we're in
Yes.
such a dangerous
because
condition.
what,
I see your point.
what we differ over is less than what should bring us together, and that should be our shared refusal to accept a fascist America. And we're seeing what a fascist America could be. We're seeing it especially in the assault on the immigrant population, the sisters and brothers. I remember Ravi Ragbir going to his regular check-in with the immigration services that he's been doing for 10 years. I think it's every couple of months or every 6 months he goes in, checks in, and then they see, okay, you're still around, you're okay, everything's cool, come back in a few more months. Well, this time they grab him up, they have a limo outside, they take him to the detention center in Miami, and they're planning on just zipping him out of the country. And this is happening with many, many more people. In Ravi's case, he was a leader in the immigrants' rights struggle, which is part of why they were targeting him.
Right.
But that also meant that a lot of people became aware of it and took to the streets and fought around it. It was taken into court. And his deportation was stopped, and we got him out of the maws of
For
that
a while.
for right
At
now.
least for right now.
It's
yeah.
still an ongoing fight, but this is happening to many more people, and it really, because I've been studying the Nazi Germany experience, and I look at what's being done to the immigrants, how they're in a situation where if you go to court, say for a traffic ticket, ICE might be stalking that courthouse and waiting there to grab you.
Yeah.
If you go to say, my partner beat me up and I want to get an order of protection,
Yeah.
you could get grabbed up. You go to work at 7-Eleven, you could get swept up.
Broken windows, policies.
Parents taking their children to school have been stopped by
Right,
ICE.
right.
See, and this is forcing people further into the margins of society. And I'm thinking about Anne Frank having to live in the attic of a sympathetic German family, and how far from that are we? And are we going to
Well, you're
sit
not
back
equating
and
it. I get
no,
what
I'm
you're
not
saying.
equating
We're
it,
not-
but how far away from that are we? Because that's
Yeah,
where it's headed.
okay.
And are we going to wait till it's there to say, okay, now we can't accept this, or are we going to say, no, this is not acceptable right now? And it's the same thing with the many attempts to bring down a Muslim ban, the rights being taken away from lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. We cannot sit back and say, well, this ain't hitting me, so it's okay. The thing that he talks about in terms of, if you watch the film farther, he talks about how many people of liberal orientation are essentially saying it hasn't hit me yet, and I hope it won't go that far. And see, that's why I bring up the Nazi analogy, because a lot of Germans said essentially the same thing.
Not me yet, and I get,
Okay,
I'll
well,
be okay,
they're
but
going
you're-
after the communists, but I'm not a communist. Oh, they're getting the trade unionists. Well, I'm a professor. I'm not in a trade union. Oh, they're going after the Jews. I'm a Christian. And see, first off, you can't sit back and say, oh, go ahead and take those other people as long as you don't get me, because if injustice is allowed to fester, it's going to spread. And then the other thing is, when they do come for you,
who's going to be left?
who's going to be there? And that's
Yeah.
a struggle that I have with a lot of black activists.
How so?
Well, people are saying Trump is not a question for black people. Yeah, police are killing people now, but they were killing people before.
Isn't that partly Reverend Barber's position, or it's not, we're focusing too much on Trump? This is not, in fact, as I understand his position, this is not what we should be concentrating mainly on. This is not a formal fascistic state, that slavery was a lot worse, and so on. Is that what you're...
Well, I heard Reverend
You've
Barber
heard-
speak
you've heard-
recently
we
up at
both
Union
have, right.
Theological
Yeah, we both did,
Seminary, and
He made that point.
a lot of what he says I agree with. These problems did not start with Trump.
Right. Okay.
You know, if you want to talk about the police murdering black people and brown people, I've been dealing with that for decades.
I know.
So
and he points out, as you heard too, as I heard, it's been worse.
Well, yes, it has been worse.
Okay.
Slavery was worse than this. I'll grant you that. But it is a continuation of savage oppression that's been built into the fabric and framework of the capitalist imperialist system. That's the reality. And we have to look at it not just as, well, since it was going on before, this isn't anything different, so we shouldn't look at it. And I'll even give Reverend Barber that they have not yet hammered fascist rule into place. The point is, though, if you're dealing with a regime out to hammer fascist rule into place, you actually need to stop it from doing that.
So that's the
Because-
stage that Bob is talking about, resistance, and what is the next
Yeah,
level?
and see, when we talk
beyond the
about
resistance?
when we talk about resistance, it has to be acting to drive the regime from office, not resistance that's hoping the Russia investigation gets it, or
Or
hoping
that some
that the
lefty-
Democrats,
liberal Democrat
the
gets-
Democrats win the
takes-
midterm and take Congress
goes
back.
beyond that. So
Because-
electoral politics is not the
Yeah, I
solution
was
to
even
any of this.
discussing this last night. I was at NYU at a program,
Okay.
and someone brought these points up, and I said, this actually talks about the politics and the aesthetics because that was the theme of the talk.
Yeah, and we're going to put that clip on at the end of the show.
Because these horrors were going on before Trump, and if your opposition to Trump is to get back to the forces that were in power before Trump,
right,
you're saying, well, I'm okay with the continuation of these horrors. I just don't want them to spread to me. And I'm not okay with the continuation of these horrors. They need to be ended. But part of what you need to do to end them is to see to it that what doesn't happen is a regime doesn't get to hammer into place conditions that make it far harder to rise up against them. And see, that's the thing that the Nazis did. They went step by step. They didn't, even though Hitler had laid out that he hated all kinds of sections of people and had plans for all of them, they went step by step.
The courts, the media.
They did go for the communists. They did go for the trade unionists and the socialists. Then they spread it to the Jews and the Roma people. The Roma
Catholics,
people, they're usually called gypsies. They went after gay people and the disabled. And by going step by step, they lulled other sections of the population to sleep. What we're trying to alert people to is we cannot be lulled to sleep. Millions of people who hate this need to take to the streets and stay in the streets with one single demand. This regime must go. The Trump-Pence regime must go. This is not the revolution. We're not saying we're trying to overthrow the system through this refuse fascism.
You just want masses of people to go out there publicly to demonstrate voice,
action,
nonviolently, as he put it.
Yes, nonviolent protest, that we refuse to accept this fascist regime, and through that to create the kind of political crisis that will force all factions of society to try to figure out how do we resolve this political crisis.
Well, did we do this a little?
That's what we need to do.
Did we do this a little bit too with the stop and frisk business too, to create an environment where there might be a change of narrative, right?
On a much smaller scale, that's exactly what we did.
Right. And then the system responded in various ways, broken windows and this and that, and it went different ways, and the same old, essentially. There may be a greater privatization of prisons, and so on. But at this point, we need to get out there and sort of put a break to all of this and get enough people out there. And then it's interesting because, as you know, I just had Mark Rudd on the show previously, and so the Columbia Rebellion was something like that. Then he said that was pretty damn good idea. There's a lot of organizing that went into that. But then what happened was not much, as he admits. I mean, as he goes off in a more radicalized, violent way, he essentially sabotaged the anti-war movement. Or not he personally, but so things fell apart. So in other words, what are the options for people? People need alternatives as well as resisting here. And when you're getting people out there, there's got to be something for them to then think about, do, and put their energies toward, that they see practically is going to lead to something in their own personal lives, right? I mean,
yeah, and see, this is actually a very important point that you bring up, because when people come together from all of our different perspectives, backgrounds, religions, whatever, we're not saying to people, because Malcolm X used to say this thing of, well, leave your differences at home. That's actually not correct, even though I love Malcolm. Come as you are and bring with you the things that you differ with other people on, but recognize and understand and remember what brought you together, and that we're acting together to accomplish a goal, to drive out a regime that's trying to hammer fascist rule into place. And through the course of that, let's even figure out the ways and forms to discuss and debate our differences, not in a have it out.
Realize that we're all being exploited.
But what are the different ways to go forward?
Right.
What are the different ways to go forward? And what has brought us together is we recognize that this regime is acting to cut out
against
the possibility to go forward in any kind of progressive direction. And we are struggling to keep that open. And then we can debate and discuss what are the ways to do that, how to go about it. how to carry this out, kind of in the ways that Bob Avakian and Cornel West did a dialogue over revolution and religion. And the point wasn't either of them trying to beat the other into submission on the question, but to
and religion,
air the different approaches to it, and also to bring out where they overlap. Because on a number of questions, because this was right around the time that the Michael Brown murder was going to the grand jury, the question of whether any cops were going to be punished around Eric Garner. And there was a lot of unity up on stage about that. They both were calling for people to act, to let the authorities, the system know right now, we're not taking this. But they also had differences on where things could go and what was even possible. And it was very important for them to air it. And the same thing with the dialogues that I did with Cornell.
So you're doing that, and you're bringing this documentary around to various forums. Obviously, we're excited to have you here and spread the word. You're going to various campuses. You're going all around the country.
Campuses, churches, community centers. Some business owners have said, "Hey, come and show it in my business." And I should actually say,
yeah, please tell us how to.
You can get to the film at the website www.revcom.us. You can go there. The trailer for the film that we saw and other excerpts from it are there. The whole film is there. And then in addition to the 1-hour film, there are several question and answer segments where Avakian takes up some of the questions that we've been talking about here and some other questions that came up from the audience. And then you could also get a number of people have issued statements. The people who have seen the film have issued statements urging others to watch the film. I think one guy that did that was a guy named Vrettos.
I think he does his show every week, the Radical something or other. But
Father Barrios, Luis Barrios did one.
And
Arturo
others.
O'Farrell.
Others.
The vocalist Maggie Brown, daughter of Oscar Brown Jr., a number of other people, and then a number of just regular people who have seen it are like, man, people have to watch this. This guy speaks with a lot of passion and substance, and people need to check it out.
I see. Wow. This has gone so fast here. So we need to, as we're told here, wrap it up. I can't believe it. But have you gotten all the major points that you wanted to, other than
I guess I'll have to get you to invite me back in case I miss something.
We can do that.
No, I think we got to it. I got to the website, and remember, www.revcom.us. That's the website. You can both find the film there, and you can find Avakian's works, other films like B.A. Speaks, Revolution, Nothing Less. You can get access to the New Communism, which brings together his new synthesis of communism, and many other things. And then you get the regular coverage in Revolution newspaper.
Carl, thank you again. Well, unfortunately, we've got to wrap it up. You're always welcome, as you know. I love you to death. We're in the struggle together. We're also going to be showing a short clip here on Bob Avakian talking about working within the electoral system.
Yes, and why the Democrats can only try to solve the crisis of Trumpism on the terms of the capitalist imperialist system.
Okay, so we're going to show that, and then we're going to close with Tracy Chapman talking about revolution, which is a great way to end it. And thank you so very, very much. Again, we'll see you next week. Jim Vrettos here, your host on The Radical Imagination. Thank you, Carl Dix.
Thank you for having me on, Jim.
Why is it that the Democrats can only try to resolve this on the terms of the system, and for that reason cannot offer any alternative that is in our interest, in the interests of humanity? Why are they determined to keep things within the established norms and acceptable limits? We can turn to the words of Barack Obama shortly after Trump won the Electoral College vote. We, Democrats and Republicans, are on the same team, Obama insisted. And he made a point of saying that we should wish Trump well and help him succeed, because his success is success for all of us. Well, we can say that here Obama was telling an important truth. Ultimately and fundamentally, they are all on the same team, which explains why the Democratic Party will only oppose what the Trump-Pence regime is doing within narrow limits and always in the interest of the team of which they are all a part. And really, we should all help Trump succeed with his fascist agenda because a successful fascism will be good for all of us? Only with the perverted logic of the system all these politicians serve, and with the poisonous outlook of American chauvinism, could anyone put forward such a position. Like the Republicans, the Democrats believe in the superiority of the capitalist system of exploitation and the exceptional greatness of America and its empire. They champion a brave new world of 21st century globalization, which rests on a vast network of sweatshops where people, including children, slave long hours for near starvation wages. They firmly believe in the right of America to dominate the world and to overturn governments, bomb countries, and slaughter people to do so. But they say it should be done with the cooperation of allies and in the name of making the world more free, orderly, and peaceful. They will talk about diversity and inclusiveness while actually acting to maintain the fundamental relations of inequality and oppression that are hallmarks of this country, because those relations are built into this system and it could not exist or function without them. In short, even with their real differences with the Republicans, they represent and serve the same system, the systems whose normal workings have now brought fascists to power.